everybody, to another edition of the Rockpile Report podcast. I'm your host, Bill, season ticket holder Drew Gear. That's our producer, Chris Kruger. And we are talking NFL Draft for Dummies 2023. Linebackers is kind of the position of the night. And here to talk to us about it, EJ Snyder of Bootleg Football. EJ, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. I'm excited. This is a position I like. I like you guys, so this is going to go well.
Guys, I like it how you kind of messed that up. I believe it is EJ, buddy. How you doing? What are you drinking?
Yeah.
No, you can't be duplicative. At some point, I'm going to have to open our podcast, and I'm not going to do it the same way because people are going to be like, "That's not as good as when Brett does it."
Because you know those people exist on the internet, which is why I don't. Why I don't read comments.
I have had to open the show before when Drew has lost his voice, whether it is from sickness or from a game.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, people are very snarky about it. People don't give Chris his due.
I would not be brave enough to try and duplicate that, Drew. I just got to say that.
So those of you who live under a rock, co-host of the Bootleg Football podcast, a fellow bourbon appreciator, Bears fan and content creator, Bears Over Beers. He's got all kinds of accolades. The time he puts in with scouting, with football coverage in general, you work incredibly hard at this. I feel like the draft coverage is probably right up there with your drinking coverage. Like you do some things.
I think draft coverage has surpassed drinking coverage because it takes more time. So there's more time for draft and less time for drinking. But I did bring a beer on, so I will be imbibing with you guys because it's one of my favorite things, and it's a founding principle of Bootleg. Like, we founded Bootleg on let's have a beer and talk about football. And you guys are right with that. You are here for that. So I'm among our people.
Let me ask you this: what do you think that this glass I'm holding in my hand is called? Do you know the name of it?
The glass itself?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, good.
Not a glass for
good. See, EJ, I like you. I walked in and I go, Chris, you're drinking a cocktail out of a wine glass. And he goes, no, that's a cocktail glass. It's called a Nick and Nora, and here's why you use it. And I told him, I go, ooh, I've never been angrier at you. Like, I have to go back. Like, I told him if I walked into a Cheesecake Factory and I saw him drinking bourbon out of this thing, so for those of you listening to the audio, not watching it on YouTube, where we now upload all of our podcasts in video format, if you were behind me at the bar at the Cheesecake Factory drinking bourbon out of this, I would tell the bar manager you sexually harassed me just to have you thrown out because I can't enjoy myself while this is happening in the room with me.
Well, I'm more living let live. I would just generally say, A, that's a lot of bourbon, and B, good on you. Have a good night.
So, Chris, as is tradition, I'm going to give it a sniff. It's all right. So, I can smell some kind of bitters. There's definitely bitters in here, correct?
There are no bitters in the way of like your Angostura bitters. Or your Regan's orange bitters.
Okay.
But there is a bitter component to it.
Okay. Is this a homemade cocktail or something you got out of a book?
Out of a book.
Okay.
It is in the spirit forward section of the book.
Okay. You can definitely taste the liquor in that, but there is a hint of something. It's like slightly, it's not even fruity. It just takes there's no bite on the back end of that. It's almost like a Manhattan, except... Wait, did you make a Manhattan?
I did not make a Manhattan, but it is from the family of Manhattans.
All right, what is this?
It is called Little Italy. It is 2 ounces of rye. I used the Noble Double Oak rye, and then 3/4 of an ounce of sweet vermouth, and a 1/2 ounce of Cynar, an artichoke bitter liqueur from Italy. And the cocktail's called Little Italy.
So I'm drinking an artichoke, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
What the hell are you going to do with the rest of a bottle of artichoke?
These are the questions, EJ, that I have for him every week. What are you going to do with that?
I can tell you, if you and Brett come out east again next year, I will have cocktails made for the both of you if you're going to record in this studio again. I will make sure.
I don't think we'd like to break tradition. That seems like a terrible idea. We wouldn't want to anger the host. So no, we're definitely going to make it back out for a game. I don't know. I would imagine it'll be next season. It might be after that. But if we do, we're not coming to town without seeing you. We couldn't do that. That would just be absolute sin.
So the last piece that we hit on there when we were doing your intro is where I want to start. Your expertise as a Bears fan. Because honestly, none of this linebacker conversation would be necessary if it wasn't your team's fucking fault for signing away Tremaine Edmonds to a contract that Buffalo refused to even discuss with him or his agent.
After trading,
after trading for Roquan Smith. What are you guys at here?
Well, if you look at the balance sheet of that transaction, they got Edmonds for less than Smith was asking for and less than Smith really signed with the Ravens for. So they basically went from Roquan Smith to Trey Edmonds for less money overall over the life of the deal. And that was Poles' focus. He got a little bit younger, not terribly younger. It's not like Roquan Smith was an aging player, but Trey Smith, famously one of the youngest players drafted in recent history. And you guys did all the heavy lifting. You guys knocked off all the rough edges, all the reasons I didn't like him in the draft. I liked his potential, but he had to land in the right spot. And he did. He landed in Buffalo. You made him into a tremendous playmaker. He really came into his own in his third season. And ta-da, I was actually surprised by the move. More so because I didn't expect that to be the area of focus when Chicago has all this money in free agency, famously the most most money in free agency this year. And they start with a huge splash at linebacker. I would say arguably one of the biggest splashes in free agency period. It's a little bit surprising to me. And then I went back to their coach's history. And, Matty Eberflus in Indianapolis was a linebacker-centric defense. They invested heavily in the defensive line in front of them, famously made some trades for some talent, and then they drafted and developed linebackers, and linebackers were a key piece of that defense, even more so than the secondary. Well, they drafted secondary last year. Come this year in free agency, they invest, and they get arguably the top free agent linebacker on the market. So I was like, I guess it makes a little bit more sense now that I think about it. And Poles has been focusing on young. He is not about one-year contracts for aging stars. He knows that's not where the team's at. It's going to be a year or two until the window truly opens. So he wants people that will be there and presumably still be in good health when that happens.
You know what you could have done was just drafted Tremaine Edmonds and kept him.
Although, if you think about the regime that was in charge when Edmonds was drafted, the likelihood that we would have polished off the rough edges as well as you all did is extremely low.
Great. You're welcome. You're welcome.
We love it. Thank you very much.
I will say one of my favorite things was being here in the studio with you and Brett when I was literally getting ready to leave, and all of a sudden I'm walking up the stairs and ESPN flashes across my phone talking about the Smith trade, and I was like, I have to come back downstairs and see his reaction in real time.
You know what? That's my fault, because to kind of break down the fourth wall when Brett and EJ did that show from the studio, they just recorded their video and I recorded the audio, so I was like half producer on that episode, and it hurts me that I didn't think of that. While they're recording, I'm over here at the desk just floating around Shefty's Twitter or Rappaport's Twitter, and that could have made the show because we didn't know about that until after we stopped the record button.
It would have been cool to see live, but it was fun just to watch your face where you were like, wait, what happened? And
yeah, in the moment it made a little bit less sense, but even very quickly after that, within, say, 24 hours, it became apparent that I was okay with that transaction because both sides basically said, well, I'm worth this. And the other side said, well, we think you're worth this. And it was, you can call it a gentleman's disagreement. They basically said, we're not going to pay you that because we don't think so. And he said, I think I can get it elsewhere. And they said, okay.
Good. Wonderful.
Fine. And he did. Like, he went and got that, but they said, we're not willing to pay that. Just like you just said, Buffalo wasn't even willing to discuss the contract with Edmonds. So it's a sort of trickle-down effect that ends up in Chicago's favor here. They get a very productive and, I would say, still ascending player for less than their very productive and probably topped-out player in Roquan Smith, who had a very high ceiling but was right near it. I don't think he's going to be increasing his skill level a lot in Baltimore. Maybe his tackle totals, but it all sort of works out. And it brings us to the show today, which is y'all have a hole now.
A hole. And here's who's on the roster as of today to fill it. Let me run down the usual suspects. Terrell Bernard, 2021 third-round pick, 1 start, projects as a will linebacker, more as a middle linebacker. Terrell Dodson, 2020 UDFA, 5 starts, primarily special teams player. Tyler Matakevich, 0 starts at linebacker, despite both Matt Milano and Tremaine Edmonds missing games over the last 2 seasons. And Balin Spector, 2021 7th-round pick, active for 6 games, saw just 12 snaps on defense at all in that last year. Now, if you're looking to field a great special teams unit, awesome. You did a great job building this linebacker room. If you actually give a shit about what happens the other, I don't know, like 60 snaps in a game? I don't know. I just feel like behind Matt Milano, the room is pretty bereft of starting upside. And yet, if you believe what our GM told us just a few weeks ago.
I mean, sometimes your answer is on your roster, and so we think, Tyrell, getting Dodson back on a 1 year, him, obviously we had the 2 draft picks last year, and Bernard and Spector. They've been in our program a year. They're going to be a lot more prepared for the pro game and our defensive system going in. So, it's a competition, and we'll continue to look, whether that's cap casualties, free agencies. If there's a player in the draft, it'll be competition. We're not going to, state now or probably next month or in 2 months, this person's the starter. They're all going to get a chance to compete, and best man wins.
Brandon Bean, BuffaloBills.com.
So first of all, EJ, if we can crack a beer together over that, because it's...
I already cracked mine. I needed to be prepared for that. But, I have a Fremont Lush, which is local.
Right.
Fremont Brewing right up in Seattle. Lush because of the fresh hops. Beautiful beer. Great spring and summer beer. Very easy drinking.
So you hear this. That's a lot to tell. Like, I literally, I'm two-fisting now. Because I hear that audio and I go, holy shit. Chris,
let's think back a little bit.
Here's what I keep going back to. I go back and I think to myself, there's a clip out there of Will Ferrell. Chris actually has it as a drop. But there's just Will Ferrell yelling, "Hey, Brandon, how dumb do you think I am?" That's how I feel in the moment hearing that statement. Because what I just heard you say, not about, hey, we don't know who the starter's going to be yet. That comes across as dodgeball. Wait, Chris, you want to hit me with it?
Hey, Brandon! How dumb do you think I am?
First of all, we don't know who our starting linebacker is going to be, but it'll be one of these guys. Comes across like the movie Dodgeball. They're playing the Girl Scout team and they go, your best player is a pirate. We don't even know who our best player is. All right? It comes across that way. Then you invoke the name Balin Spector, a 7th round draft pick who has not seen NFL action. You invoke that name when talking about who might he's in the mix. That sounds like you're either...
Well, it's true. I mean, if you're talking about an absolutely objective look at it, it's true.
And this is what I love about Brandon Bean. He says the things, and he's very honest, and he goes, these are the guys that are in the mix. He just doesn't add the today caveat. That probably needs to be because he's not an idiot. But it's frustrating to hear him, to watch him go out there with a straight face and say these things and not expect me to get real drunk and laugh about it.
Yeah, well, there is that reaction, but let's wind up the Wayback Machine a little bit. This is a GM who famously said that, a former starting quarterback in Chicago, after a little bit of time in your fair city was, the world's best. And, if he had to have somebody marry his daughter, it would probably be risky, right?
Oh, Jesus.
Like, that was the world's greatest sales job, to get a pick out of someone else, right? To get Pittsburgh to bite and say, oh, no, we shined him up with our offensive coordinator, who's now the head coach in New York. And you need him, this guy. Talent, and now he has the Dable haze around him. You should make him your starter, right? And somebody bit, and that's fine, but that's his job. That's his approach as a GM. On the backside, Brandon Beane's kind of like a duck. On top, he's calm, cool, collected, and he's saying all the press sound bites that go for the press that are not going to, ruffle anybody's feathers about, hey, we've got guys on the roster and we're going to let them all compete. That's a very sort of down the fairway, 200 yards, right in the middle, nobody's going to get upset with comment. Underneath, he's paddling like hell. If he is not absolutely leaning on the scouting department and going, look, we need a linebacker, probably two. Get me a bunch of candidates. I don't care where you find them, but we are not going into war, this fall with just this.
And you also have to think about the timing of that statement. Now, to be fair, he timed that statement. It was when he was talking about his recent free agent signings. He's not stupid. He knows that everybody's clamoring for, hey, you just lost Tremaine Edmonds. What are you going to do? There's all these high-priced free agents on the market. Where are you in chasing these down? And his reaction is kind of easy. We're good.
Yeah, I'm not.
I don't need anything, because it doesn't serve him to tip his hand and say, well, we're going to go to the draft, because now you've just done yourself a disservice for any other linebacker-hungry team. So instead, you say all the right things, but there's no way anyone believes that Balin Spector is in the mix to be a starting linebacker on this team. That's where it became laughable for me. So with that, I want to talk about the linebacker position in this upcoming draft, because if they're going to make a move, it was going to be here because of their cap constraints. I want to start with just your idea of the makeup of the class, because I've heard it said that some of these guys they're barely grade as first. Like, there will be guys taken in the first round, but in terms of grading, there's probably only one or two who deserve to be there. Do you think it's a top heavy class, or do you think there's talent evenly distributed? Just what is the makeup of this thing to you?
Yeah, I think it's got good depth, but there aren't shining stars at the top. There are one or two guys, depending on who you talk to, that might be graded as first rounders, and it would be back into the first rounders. These are not guys that are going to fly off the board in the top 10, 15 picks. That is not this class. There aren't any Roquan Smiths in this class. We had some last year that, there was, talk, and they eventually went first round. That's fine. This is not that class, but it is not a bad class either. It is not bereft of talent. There are a bunch of interesting players in this draft at this position. It is less talked about because it is not as deep as edge, running back, cornerback, or tight end, because those position groups are crazy loaded. You're going to be able to find stuff in the third, fourth, fifth round that might legitimately start for your team, depending on the position. Inside linebacker, again, doesn't have that star power at the top, but that doesn't mean there aren't guys who can play here. And that works really well into Buffalo's draft strategy because, look, nobody was banging down Matt Milano's door in the year that he was chosen.
No.
Right?
Well, and that's one of the things that I thought about when I tried to do my own, again, Chris, there's a reason EJ's here talking to us tonight. We tried the whole bit of Drew's going to talk to people about the NFL draft. And after years of falling on my face, I realized, what would be more fun is if I just drink and have conversations with people a lot smarter than me.
EJ, let me, we'll just hit you with, I think all it needs is two things. It's specific to this class is why we do this run of NFL Draft for Dummies. Number one, Reggie Ragland gonna be a dog.
I thought Reggie Ragland was the answer.
Number two was, why did we draft Trey White and not
Reuben Foster.
That's it.
Reuben Foster.
That's why
Ferrari Foster, yes.
That's why EJ's here.
So this
Well,
is
EJ's only 50% better than Drew in that category because I was a Trey White defender. Trey White was my dog in that draft. I loved him as a player, and I famously called my uncle after they drafted him. I said, man, you're going to love this guy. And he was like, and I was like, no, you're going to love Trey White. He's an outstanding player. I thought Reggie Ragland was going to be good too. Not great, but I thought Reggie Ragland was going to be good. He had a solid ranking for me. He's a guy that it didn't work out for in the pros, but coming out in terms of watching his film, I thought it was good.
Well, so, and it's funny that you mentioned Reggie Ragland because this is the thing that when I'm doing my own rudimentary overview of the draft before we do these shows, because I don't want to be a complete asshole and know nothing, I look at this stuff and what I see is that there's huge chunks of this linebacker class that hail from schools out of conferences that aren't exactly known for physical defense. There's not a lot of Reggie Ragland types anymore. Instead, it's schools that hail from conferences with these wide open run and shoot offenses, which in turn lends itself on the defensive side of the ball to needing coverage players more so than down near the line of scrimmage, physical run stuffers. I mean, Chris, there are 4 SEC linebackers and 2 Big Ten in the top 20. That's 6 out of 20. There are a shitload out of the Big 12 and the Pac-12 where run and gun is the name. West Coast offense is the name of the game. Like air raid offense is what you're doing out here. So you can't a Reggie Ragland never would have survived in today's Big 12. You wouldn't have been a starter. And that's where a lot of these guys at the top of the linebacker draft board this year are hailing from. And I find that really interesting when it comes to just like what it means for not just the direction of the game, because really the pro game will go where the talent takes it. That's been proven time and time again. But also it does speak to what's working. It's just this works and the NFL will copy that. They will adapt. There was years where there was terrible tight end play. And I'd argue it still hasn't acclimated back to where it used to be. You used to be able to draft tight ends in the first, second round, and you knew those guys were just going to, they'd churn productivity, whether it was A+ blockers, they were going to be good pass catchers. Well, define good pass catcher now. Now, 500, 600 yards, you're mediocre. Like, you're Hayden Hurst signing a $6 million deal in free agency because that's okay, but it's small potatoes. Linebacker is becoming that way. I feel like if you're not a coverage guy, coverage first, the run is secondary because the NFL has become a passing league. And so in that way, if you were a team like the Buffalo Bills going, listen, we're never going to replace Tremaine Edmonds. But if we needed to replace any facet of his game most, it's probably, given the Taylor Rapp signing, who's more of an in-the-box safety, big, he's a small linebacker like you were talking about, like safeties who just... Realistically, he should have been like Mark Barron.
Maybe.
But I'm just talking about like in terms of his skill set and the way he's played in the pros so far. He's been more effective in the box than trying to trust him as a deep safety. The fact that we signed him kind of tipped their hand as far as like, okay, now when we want to go into dime situations and we want a big dime that we think can still defend the run a little bit. But what do we do in this nickel that we've run 90% of the time for the last 3 seasons? You're going to need a coverage backer. And that takes precedent over whatever they do against the run. Who are some of your favorite pass defenders out of the linebacking group this year?
Yeah, and really looking at replacing the lost snaps from Edmonds.
Yes.
When I'm looking at what Buffalo needs, it's an athletic backer with some size, right? You got Milano, who is, I think we all know what Matt Milano is good at, and he's really good at it. But what Edmonds brought as a sort of counterpoint, as a balance to that room, is an athletic backer with some size who can run the alley forward and back. And there are options for that in this draft. There's not a ton of them. But 2 of the guys that we talked about that have borderline first-round grades are those guys. And it is because they have that size and the athleticism to run with the pass. And the first one's Drew Sanders from Arkansas. more known as a going forward guy because
Roll Tide.
he was an What's that?
The Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
I beat
That's
you.
right. Well, I say the Tide misused him, but that's where
Yes.
most people got to understand who Drew Sanders was, is he was an edge at Alabama and not very successful. So he transferred to Arkansas, found a home at middle linebacker, and absolutely exploded. He is 6'4", 235, can run like the wind, and he makes plays all over the place. He makes plays against the pass. His passing grade is very solid in this class of linebackers. He is a rush threat from the middle, which is what we would call blitzing more than rushing. You can rush him off the edge in sort of NASCAR packages because he has the length and athleticism to win there as well, plus all that experience from Alabama. He is a really interesting sort of multi-tool player that is as close physically as anybody is to Edmonds in this draft. Now, is he Edmonds? No, nobody's Edmonds. That's a very rare athletic profile. But Sanders is as close as you're going to get. He is, I think he's sort of tickling the end of the back of the first round, depending on value, which, strangely enough, is where you guys are picking. But more likely is probably going to end up in the second round. And the other guy is Jack Campbell from Iowa. And you talk about, oh, wait a minute. Wide open offensive. Look, this guy plays in the Big Ten, and he played on the best defense in the country, the best college defense in the country. And he is 6'4", 249. And he is a pure middle linebacker. He is not some rush guy that they drop occasionally. He is a pure middle linebacker at that size and has one of the best pass coverage grades in this entire linebacking class, if not the best, which is odd. But if you're looking for that skill set and a ton of football intelligence, he's always in the right place. He's I don't even want to say surprisingly good athlete, because Iowa turns out great athletes like Penn State turns out great athletes. He is a very good athlete at that size.
You know who knows about that? Bills fans. Aaron Maben, he was great. He was a real treat.
Well, there's lots of athletes, not all football players. Jack Campbell is both. And either one of those guys would be my sort of go-to. You're going to have to spend that pick at the end of the first round to probably get either one of them. I doubt they're going to fall to the end of the second round. But they would be the sort of most shoehorn replacement for, we lost Edmonds, we're trying to replace Edmonds in one fell swoop. It would be one of those two guys. Now, there's a bunch of other guys, and we could talk about those, but it looks like you've got something to say.
No, I'm just good. I'm laughing because this is what I love about this thing being on YouTube now, is that people see me reacting to things. Chris is just putting wildly offensive jokes on the...
Nobody saw anything. EJ was on camera.
The 60-inch
They couldn't
TV.
see your
No,
reaction.
that's my point. It's hilarious. 60-inch TV, and now he's reacting to it, and it's just... This is why this is fun. This is why I'm
so
glad we
good.
got into video, because it's like I'm over here just laughing, and now people are like, "What
What is he laughing about? Why doesn't he like Jack Campbell?
Why is he laughing at Jack? No, I'm not laughing at Jack Campbell. Other than, I want an opinion from you. You study linebackers, you like them. People have brought up the idea of like, well, his arms are short, and if his arms are short, then blockers. But he's also 6, and he's high. He's high-waisted, which means that you're going to have, not even high-waisted, but you're just a big guy, which means it's harder to get leverage when a 6'2", 6'3" guard comes at you with a lower center of gravity, and you don't have the longer arms to get in on him. What's his hand fighting look like? Because I can just see a world where if that's his makeup, he might have a difficult time against NFL caliber offensive linemen.
Think about who he went against in practice.
That's true, though. Shit. Yeah.
Three-fifths of the Iowa offensive line gets drafted at least every other year.
Well, and isn't that the beauty of certain conferences? It's like I was talking about earlier. Sure. There are certain things you glean from where did this player play, and that's almost just as important as what is their physical skill set. How did they test? Yeah. Well, that's important, but also who did they play? What's their experience like? This is a guy who was that productive in a defense that routinely faces teams that put offensive linemen into the NFL. And these are NFL caliber, NFL coached, or NFL pro style. I think it's fair to say. Coached offensive lines.
They make up a large percentage of the league. If we're talking about Ohio State,
yeah,
Michigan, his own team with Iowa. Wisconsin has a ton of blockers. They have a great center this year. Like, Jack Campbell went against all of those guys. Name your favorite Big Ten lineman that is now your favorite NFL lineman. Jack Campbell faced them multiple times.
Okay.
And you can go look at the tape and see how he did.
So you think it's
against those
overblown?
guys.
So you think at this talk about the short arms?
I think he's a very good football player. We can talk about his frame and we can talk about his athleticism, and those are both important things in a draft profile, but you know me, tape is first. How did he do? Right? And Jack Campbell has some of the most impressive tape in this interior linebacking class, going forward and going backwards. The backwards part surprised me a little bit because he is that tall, and I thought Iowa, that tall, not a pass. He's probably slow and poor-handed, right? He's got an interception against OSU that you'll drop your drink.
Now I'm going to go watch that later.
You should, but don't have a drink in your hand.
Well, no, what I'll do is I'll wake up my wife and show it to her at like 10:30 at night.
Do apologize to your wife for me.
And I'm going to tell her, EJ told me to do this.
Yeah, tell her it's not my fault. Oh, man, that's funny.
So two-part question here now.
Yeah.
First of all, odds that those guys are available at 27, you seem to be pretty confident that the back half of the first round, they'll be there.
One of them will be there for sure.
Sure. The Bills are a team with a lot of other needs, right? Like,
correct.
At places where the draft is very strong this year. We have a notable lack of depth at all. If Dawson Knox got hurt, we have no one with any starting experience. It's been talked about the need for wide receiver talent, upgrades there, although this class seems to be trending towards day 2, day 3 being where the real value is. Also, the trenches on both sides of the ball. Spencer Brown, our right tackle Spencer Brown needs competition. We have 0 defensive tackles under contract for next year. And that's by choice because the team could have opened cap space for itself this year by signing Jaquan Jones, who has been a breath of fresh air as the first true one-tech D-tackle in Sean McDermott's career here in Buffalo who actually did the job and did it well. They could have extended him. They chose to slow play that decision, and I think a lot of that hinges on what happens here this year in the draft. If they can find a younger guy to fill that role, they will. But so they have these needs, right? And then you look at the fact that they do have last year's third rounder in Terrell Bernard, who got one start. If they decide to address those needs day 1, day 2, and then they turn around and say, okay, day 3, now we're looking at linebacker because we realize that we can't play dime all the time. and that even in nickel, like, this is a shaky thing to trust Bernard or trust Rapp or trust whatever, and we're not going to try to slow. We need somebody to start grooming to eventually take this role. What do you think for 4-3 off ball, even front middle linebacker prospects? What do you think's out there for us?
Well, we're not going to skip all the way to day 3 because there's a very important player on day 2 that we have to talk about just because of Buffalo.
Okay.
Buffalo's history with Edmonds, right? They took an incredibly raw athletic linebacker out of Virginia Tech in Edmonds. And they were comfortable doing that. They thought, we have the system. We have the coaches. It's their ethos. Environment.
Look at Josh Allen. Yeah. They said, give me raw blocks.
100%.
Dawson Knox.
So, to a lesser extent, for sure. But Allen and Edmonds, one on the offense, one on the defense. There's both sides of the coin that says, we're as good as anybody in the NFL at doing this. And there's a guy that I think fits that mold on defense at the position of need, and that's DeMarvion Overshown from Texas. He is, if you just want to do the whole thing all over again, he's the guy. 6'2", 229, extremely long arms, barely has scratched the surface of what he could do at Texas. One of my good friends, actually, that came with me to the game, you met him, Frank, lives about 3 miles north of Austin, and is a longtime Horns watcher. And when I reached out to him about Overshown and said, man, I don't know, I like him. I think he shows flashes. What do you think? And he said, just getting started. Hasn't even he's got lots more in the tank that he didn't use, and he's figuring it out. And when he figures it out, just the same as Edmonds tape, when it all hits, you go, holy shit. Like, you go, wow.
So this is a
Hold
question
on.
I've had.
I hate that you brought up that player because I have on the monitor that's attached to the wall Drew's notes for tonight's show, and this man is listed as players.
Are you saying that I backed up Drew, and now you've got to just
I don't
publicly acknowledge that?
I don't like it.
How sweet.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris. You should have told me.
By you. Oh God. It really, I'm cracking another
Anyways,
one.
no. He's going to be on that day 2 in that day 2 range.
I have
He
a
is
question for
probably
you
gonna
about
be,
him. Can I ask you a question?
Okay,
about him?
go for it.
It's
Of
been
course.
in the back of my head. I watched his games because I watched Texas this year.
Sure.
You saw him. He showed up. Games, you were like, oh man, that's a linebacker. Then you find out, like I did, that he's a converted safety. And I go, holy shit, that's a giant safety. Who was going to try? Wait, what? You don't play safety at 6'3", unless you're, Hooker? And Hooker was huge in college for playing safety. They moved him to linebacker. 4.5 40 time is impressive for a linebacker. A lot of his RAS scores, they're impressive. Bad shuttle times, which I feel like is weird if you're a DB moving to linebacker. Is he stiff, like the metrics say he might be, or, because I watched him play, he doesn't play stiff.
He doesn't play stiff.
So is it a processing thing, or do you think it was just bad workouts?
There's always a question with workouts. I'll tell you the story. There's a player that we got to see up close at Shrine Bowl, and I thought, this is an interesting guy, day 3 guy, most likely. I think he's got a role. I happened to run into an agent who I met there last year, and I was like, oh, hey, you're back. Who do you have this year? And she listed off her clients, and he was one. And I was like, oh, really? I'm really kind of interested by him. Like, I saw him last year when I was at UCLA. He's obviously, grown. Like, his role grew. Like, what can you tell me? And of course, get the agent spin about that. Anyways, I get a question from another analyst like 2 weeks ago, and they're like, man, this guy ran a crap 40, like basically like a 5 flat 40. What's the deal? And I was like, well, if you watch tape, he's not a 5 flat guy, right? He's a maybe high 4.6 guy, maybe low 4.7 guy on a bad day, but like I think he's probably mid 4.6s, somewhere in there. And look, he did what he did at his speed. You've seen what he has done against other defenders that are going to get drafted. Let me look into it. So I DM'd his agent and I said, hey, I just looked at the 40 times for the UCLA Pro Day. Guy didn't run so well. Like, what was the deal? And she said it was monsooning all day. They ran outside. I've been on that practice field, and Southern California this spring has had a ton of rain. And said basically it was raining all morning and they had to run outside. And I was like, oh, well, that makes perfect sense. So I told the other analyst, hey, so testing numbers, they are what they are. It is a snapshot of a day. Sometimes guys will have their own personal pro days if they're coming back from injury or they slipped or whatever else. And the other thing is they're subjective. I went to a couple of pro days this year. I went to Oregon State and I went to Washington's pro day this year. It was my first time at pro days when they were happening. And pro days are a really fascinating thing overall. They're run by scouts. They're not run by the school. And they're run by different scouts from different teams who set up the drills and ask the other scouts, what do you want to see? And they'll basically nominate kind of a senior scout to go out and run the drills, the workouts, the timing. And that goes for everything, including the sprints. And then they don't give out times, which was the weirdest thing to me. I figured there'd be like a track board, right? And it'd be like, 4-4. No, the guy just runs. And you're like, shit, I didn't have my phone out. Like, what was that? And everybody's like, and I asked the sports information director at one of the schools. I said, so are you going to be like, I don't know, giving out a sheet? And this, you'll love this, both of you probably. It's a fascinating insight to what pro days really are. He said, and I quote, no, they don't give them to us.
Wait.
And I was like,
isn't that the guy?
Huh? And I was like, wait, what? And then I realized, oh, this isn't what you think it is. This is the true confluence between the NFL and the school. And the school is paying for this, hosting this, whatever. And he literally said, they don't give them to us. And I'm like, they're your players. And then I realized, no, they're not your players anymore.
Not anymore.
They're the league's players.
Damn.
Right? And I was like, huh, isn't that fascinating? Now, it's not the same at every school. Sometimes they, U of O, University of Oregon, had a full printout that they gave to all the journalists. Like, it's different at every place, but they literally don't tell you how fast a guy ran. So you can record it, right? You can put up a video. You can go home with your own stopwatch and give your best guess or whatever. But there's famously better times at pro days than there are at the combine. And so it all really comes back to, how did this guy run in pads on film against other players?
Does he look fast? Did he play fast? Did he hit a hole?
Basically, I think when I look at Overshone at Texas, he's plenty fast, right? And he's plenty fluid. He is not stiff-hipped. He has a lot of ability to change direction. It might be a little less quick than some of his shorter counterparts, just because he has longer levers, right? Again, his limbs are longer. It takes a while to turn them, but it doesn't take long. Like, he makes some plays on film against high-level athletes that are staggering.
Well, be careful, because that's what got Edmonds in trouble here. Everyone goes, well, he doesn't trigger against the run fast enough. He's 6'5". I'm sorry. He's 6'5", 250 pounds. Yes, Matt Milano is faster to diagnose and come downhill at 6'2", 230.
Yeah. Like generously 6'2".
Yeah, a generous 6'2" at 230. Yes, he moves quicker. That's like saying, hey, the shooting guard on this NBA team is quicker than the center.
True.
Shocking. Shocker.
So one of the great things about Overshone is that length, because length is deadly in pass defense. And you talked at the top about how important pass defense is for modern NFL linebackers. Even if you are a step slow, if you are that tall and have arms that long, we think of it with catch radius with wide receivers. This is your defense radius as a pass defender.
It's like a hand grenade.
Just
there's an area of effect. That's
right.
Like a hand grenade.
Area of effect for a guy like Demarion Overshone, who's already pretty tall but has really long arms, is bigger. He doesn't have to be in the hip pocket of X. He could be a half a step away, still deflect that ball, because he's got the experience and safety like you talked about, and he has these very long arms, and he's fast. Like, let's not mince words.
Yes.
For a guy that weighs, 230 pounds, 229 pounds, he's quick.
Yes. So then who else do you prognosticate might be a fit for the Buffalo Bills? Like, just in terms of those, like, hey, I don't have to spend a premium on you. I could get you day 2. There might be a day 3 guy or two who might fill a gap here that maybe not this year. Maybe this year you have to take some pain. It's going to be an acclimation process the same way James Cook was at running back last year. And then down the stretch you go, holy shit, that kid, if I can get the ball in his hands, he can actually make some plays. Is like the similar trajectory at linebacker. Who are some day 3 guys you like?
Yeah, and when you get into day 3, there's a reason they're at day 3, so you have to give something up.
Yep.
Right? You're giving up either a playmaking sense, like you got to work on their diagnosis of plays and their reaction to it, or you're giving up some size, or you're giving up some speed. There's something there that you're not getting, or else that player would be on day 2 or day 1. And there are a couple of guys. First thing I'm going to do is a little bit strange. I'm going to talk about a guy that a lot of your listeners are probably going to go, but what about? And I want to address that. Trenton Simpson from Clemson. Now, 6'2", 235, tremendous athlete. I think his RAS is like 984. Relative athletic score is like 984. Crazy athlete. You look at the film, and I would say it is lesser than Edmonds' college film. And that is to say, when he makes a play, he makes a play. He doesn't make that many plays, and he disappears for long stretches. And he's used only, for the most part, he was using Clemson's defense only in one way, which is very close to the line of scrimmage. And if you're looking to replace some of that pass coverage, again, that's a projection. Is it possible that he can do it and just wasn't asked to do it at Clemson? It's possible. Is he really practiced in it and really good at it? Not so much.
What are you willing to bet on that is the question.
And how long are you willing to wait?
Yes.
So a lot of people are just going to look at Trenton Simpson, look at his numbers, look at his size, look at his athletic profile and go, why didn't you talk about Trenton Simpson? It's the same thing as Edmonds. If you look at the tape, it's not the same thing as Edmonds. So I'm not going to talk about Trenton Simpson. I am going to talk about Jalen Graham from Purdue and Charlie Thomas from Georgia Tech. Now, Charlie Thomas, we got to see at the Shrine Bowl. Jalen Graham's a guy I found on tape. 6'1", 220 for Jalen Graham. I like his game a lot. And when I looked up his pass coverage numbers, I thought, that checks out. Like, he plays well away from the line of scrimmage and against the pass. He's not the biggest guy, but he's very instinctive. He is athletic, doesn't have a ton of size. But he's got a bunch of production. He's got experience in that role that Buffalo used Edmonds in. So in that way, he's coming in with a head start. He's going to have to do some growing physically, and he's going to have to do some maturing just like every college football player is. So again, is he going to make a huge impact this year? No. Are there a lot of things on tape that make me think that could be a decent NFL player? Yeah, there are. Charlie Thomas, Georgia Tech. Massive athlete, 6'2", 216, and that's not a big guy physically, but when you see him athletically, it pops. Like, it pops in person, it pops on the screen. When he makes plays, you're like, ooh, look at that. He got there in a hurry, and he likes to hit. Not necessarily as skilled in the passing game, but makes plays against the pass. Because, again, at that size, he can really run. He's basically just a sort of puffed-up safety. But loves impact. When he diagnoses plays correctly, it shows up. Doesn't always do that. Can get caught up in the trash versus the run. Again, you're going to have to give up on some things to be able to have highlight plays. That's right. So those two guys are names that I would keep an eye on. Nobody's going to be banging down their door, early on day 2, even probably late day 2. They're going to survive to day 3. They're going to be available in probably round 4. And if you want to stockpile a couple of guys because you're not sure they're all going to hit, and you want to throw, say, those 2 guys in the mix with Terrell Bernard and say, okay, now best man wins, go for it.
Chris, I go to you. You've been here listening to me and EJ talk about this stuff for probably about an hour now. How angry will you be? You've sat here, me, Ty Dunn, yourself, we've sat here and done podcasts where we talked about the need for this team to get some cheap, dynamic offensive help and to backfill the offense with players who will be here, provide dividends, both the short term and long term. And yet, here you are going, man, if we could just add a defensive end, a defensive tackle, a linebacker, like, oh, man, the depth.
So are you saying that if we use our first-round pick to replace Trey Edmonds, if you look at the gap at that position where we lost Edmonds.
To everyone else currently on the roster.
Just look at that gap, and then also look at the gap with your teeth. It's the same size.
Holy shit!
Massive.
And this is why we go to Chris.
So you can't get that kind of analysis anywhere else. You just can't.
So my question to you is, how mad would you be as the Lay fan?
I'm not going to be mad if we're taking, like...
If 27th...
If Campbell's
Jack
there...
Campbell is the Bills' draft pick. Because I'll tell you what, EJ. Again, I've been offense or bust since the season ended. Sure. I'm sitting here now, having talked to Brett, having talked to Matt Waldman, having talked to a number of people about NFL draft topics. I'm starting to get the feeling that if you're gonna come out of this draft, not with what makes you feel good as a fan who comes in with a preconceived notion of need, but as I want my football team to be stocked with great players for as long as possible who don't cost a fortune, this is where we do it on the defensive side of the ball. Linebacker at 27 doesn't upset me as much as it used to. Like,
Sweet.
like no. And you're to blame for that? I should say thank
I
or
understand
blame.
that.
What I'll say is, Chris, when it happens, will you be mad? If
No,
Jack
I'm not.
Campbell's the pick.
I'm not going to be mad, and it's because of the guy from Texas that EJ brought up without having your notes, and you already had him written down on your notes. EJ didn't know that, and it makes you look good as a host, and I don't like that.
But if they draft Overshone, holy shit. Will
Oh,
that be...
look out, Chris. If that happens, you're done.
EJ, you have no idea. It happens all the time between free agency
Oh, no,
and the
I
draft.
do get it. Like, I have been there. I do get it. But, you know, as a counterpoint, there are lots of good options, and it doesn't have to be linebacker, right? Because everybody that's going to say, oh, you got now listens to this and say, oh, you got to drop Jack Campbell or bust, right? You don't. Because Matt Milano wasn't a first rounder. Matt Milano's a damn good NFL linebacker, right? So we don't all know. Maybe it's Jalen Graham. Maybe it's some other guy that I didn't even list, right? Very, very possible. And I will also say, if Buffalo gets there, they get to 27, and Jack Campbell's on the board, and everybody that listens to this is like, take Jack Campbell. And Dalton Kincaid is also on the board. Take Dalton Kincaid.
Over Darnell Washington?
Well, what do you want, right? Everybody in Buffalo has been screaming for wide receiver 2, right?
Mm-hmm. So is Dalton
Kincaid.
okay, so that
Dalton Kincaid becomes wide receiver 2. He's a tight end, but Dalton Kincaid becomes wide receiver 2.
So when you run 12 personnel, can he run block as tight end 2? Nah, see, I don't like that look.
Come on, man. You guys run the ball like 12 times a game. Don't give me that.
That exactly right there is why I go Darnell Washington. It's like, for as much as that, like, in my own idea of what
it's lovely to
football
have
should
6
be.
offensive linemen. That's a great thing.
Yes. At the same time, I'd love to have just a couple tight ends who can do a lot of things. And then if I do go 12, you have to decide, should I condense the box or should I stay in nickel and just trust that they might hit me with the thing that they might? And then both.
Well, and depending on their nickel, if you've got Knox and Kincaid, they're taller than any of the nickels for the most part they're going to be facing. You're probably still going to get a decent matchup.
And that's my point.
That's, all of these things have to be weighed in the moment, in the situation. It's why the draft is fascinating. It's why it's dynamic. It's why it's difficult. It's why it's an imperfect science. But if you get there and Jack Campbell is there and Dalton Kincaid is there, you take Dalton Kincaid and you go get a middle linebacker somewhere else because they're available, right? Now, we've talked a lot about Matt Milano, glowing praise. And we've said, look, Matt Milano is a great NFL football player, and he fits hand in glove with Buffalo's system. However, if Matt Milano goes down right now, listed behind him on the depth chart is Terrell Bernard.
It's Terrell Bernard.
And nobody else. So, Buffalo could also, later in the draft, for an inexpensive fee, go after a middle linebacker to help back up that depth and ensure that they sort of have a succession plan, but also they have an, in case of emergency break glass plan behind Milano if he, God forbid, rolls an ankle. And there are guys like that in this class too.
You've made me feel a lot better about this. I still feel like now I'm all like this, Chris, after every one of these shows, I go, oh, because I am, for as much as I'm like, oh, I understand X's and O's, I don't watch as much, maybe it's kids, I don't have as much college football watching as I used to. So now I'm stuck listening to draft pundits talk about who they think and what they think. And every one of these shows we do, I walk away from going, that guy made a lot of good points. We should probably do that first. I like the fact that you're the first one who's willing to admit this position probably doesn't have to be first.
No.
And you'll be okay if you don't. Just one question. Isn't Balin Spector ridiculous as an NFL starter at any point?
It depends, right? So
Oh, he's
here's
trying to
the
be
thing.
political.
No, I'm not. I've actually talked to this guy.
Because guys, so this is what I love about their coverage. He's talked to Balin Spector. He interviewed him.
Shrine Bowl invites.
EJ, why don't you
That's right.
detail how you got to talk to Balin Spector and lead into the coverage you do for the NFL and plug all of the various ways you do so?
Yeah, so the reason we got to talk to Balin Spector is that for the last 2 years, we've gotten invites to the Shrine Bowl. It's been down in Las Vegas. Balin Spector was an invite, not this year, but last year, obviously, before he was drafted. He was just coming off an injury. He famously played the last half of his career at Clemson with a big old club on his hand as a linebacker. He's a pretty effective guy, had a lot of starts in the ACC. He was experienced. I understand why people like him. And we got to talk to him. We weren't quite sure who to talk to in his group, and we were like, hey, Clemson, that'll play. Like, let's talk to him. And, interesting guy. We knew he was coming off injury. He was out of the cast by the time he made the Shrine Bowl. And so we got to sit down and interview him. And fascinating player. Brett set him on his heels a little bit because he had Brent Venables' playbook, and Balin wasn't aware that was out. He got a little bit defensive about that. He's like, where'd you get it? But once he realized that Brett was in his defense and could talk to him on the same level with the same language, he started to open up about why certain things happen. And players are really interesting in terms of sometimes you say, hey, this went well, and they say, great. And you say, this didn't go so well. And they say, well, that's because, right? Or they go, oh, no, they got us, right? They flat out got us. There was a little bit of mix there with Balin, but we got a better feel of who he was as a player and why he made those decisions. And, came away thinking, hey, this is a guy that I think probably could occupy, this is again us projecting before he was drafted, the role he currently occupies for Buffalo, which is he's going to be a special teamer. He's going to be a backup that's, again, in case of emergency, break glass, insert Balin Spector. For as a long time, entrenched NFL starter, I would say I think so, but I'm always going to leave the door open and say he could surprise us, right? There have been plenty of people in the NFL, lots and lots of players who I have said either I don't think they're ever going to be a full-time starter and they've gone on to that status, or I think this guy's an NFL starter and they don't get their chance, and then they finally get their chance. And hey, look at that. They were in the right situation. I was a big Dre Greenlaw backer.
Yes. Dre Greenlaw.
I love Dre Greenlaw coming out. And there weren't very many people that did. And I said, I really like his game. Again, I wasn't advocating that he should go replace any incumbent NFL starters, but I was like, this is a guy where you're going to get him. You want to add to your football team. He's going to be of value. He's going to give you everything. He's really smart. He's got a ton of snaps under his belt in a big conference. He ends up going to the 49ers, perfect situation, and thrives, has exceeded even what I thought he was capable of. So I've been on both sides of that debate, so I'm never going to say this guy is never going to be an NFL starter. I'll say I don't think he's got it in him, but I would still like that player to surprise me because I want to see all these players play as well as they possibly can.
Well, I've almost talked to Balin Spector's girlfriend because his girlfriend and I have the same hairstylist. That is a fact.
No kidding.
I love how
these are the connections.
I love these are the connections. This is the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon that we have here. EJ, that's the type of stuff I love about what you do, how you do it. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find your work, both covering our now former linebacker Tremaine Edmonds, and
That's
also
true.
the stuff you guys have coming up on Bootleg.
Yeah, so first and foremost, Bootleg Football. Go to YouTube, type in Bootleg Football, or anywhere you get your podcast, type it in. We'll pop right up for you. Cover the league year-round, heavy emphasis on draft coverage. But also, all summer long, we do divisional preview episodes, a full episode for every team, and a divisional wrap-up at the end of the week. That will be coming back this year. We're really excited about that. We will be in Kansas City for the draft. We'll be doing our draft live stream all 3 days, every pick, as we've done for the last now 3 years. This will be the 4th year running, which is crazy. But it's our first year being on site wherever the NFL draft is. So we're looking forward to that. Going to have some events around that. And then Bears Over Beers is sort of sporadic in the off season. But we do cover the Chicago Bears during the season. We have a couple of off season episodes, and I will be popping into Windy City Gridiron's draft coverage, mostly on Saturday, to kind of recap some of their picks. So that's most of it, but just mostly follow me on Twitter at FootballEJ. All those things will be listed there, and you can sort of keep up that way.
I can cut this if you'd like, but if you are in Kansas City and you want to be present at a bootleg event, you guys are recording at Holiday Distilling, where I have seen last summer going out to visit my brother who lives in Lawrence, Kansas, going out to the Holiday Distilling and walking into their bar area to see a giant glowing Kansas City Sports Network sign in their bar area. So, I mean, if you're going to the draft,
that was one of the most sort of what in the world is happening moments when you texted me that picture and you're like, don't you know these guys? And I'm like, what the hell are you doing in Kansas City? You're from Buffalo.
You're not supposed to be here.
You know,
they don't let you people outside much like Charlie from Always Sunny, they don't let us outside the borders of the city.
I know they should, though, because honestly, if we were ever going to have a sort of trifecta meeting of the minds like Rockpile, KCSN, and Bootleg, I'm pretty sure we would break the bounds of reality with that. But we are going to be at Holiday Distilling on Sunday after the draft with the KCSN guys. They're going to record their wrap-up podcast. We're going to record ours. And then apparently they have scheduled a party to which you can buy tickets. So this started out because we're good friends with the KCSN guys. We see them at Shrine Bowl every year, and we met them at the Senior Bowl 3 years ago, before KCSN even started. And I had talked with BJ Kissel, the founder, and he had said, oh yeah, we're going to go up on Sunday, and there's plenty of space. You could record yours there as well. And I said, great, just put us on that ticket. We'll tag along. Be happy to do so. I checked in with him last week and was like, we're still good for that, right? And he's like, yeah, it might be a party now. And it came out on their schedule that they're inviting folks and selling tickets. And BJ famously brought us 2 bottles. I know you guys are bourbon aficionados. Brought us 2 bottles of Holiday Bottled in Bond to the Shrine Bowl. He had threatened to do so the next time he saw us. We didn't think he would do it traveling. We thought he would do it when we went to Kansas City. Good to his word. BJ, fantastic guy. And I will vouch. The Holiday Bottled in Bond is delicious. It is.
Exactly.
Fantastic.
That's why it's on my shelf right now.
It is fantastic stuff. And Chris, you know me. I don't drink a lot of liquor. I a finger and a half, 2 fingers over ice, and I'm good for liquor. I'll drink a little bit more beer, but like, we got those bottles. All the interviews you see from the Shrine Bowl, the second half of them were shot literally in a sort of closed bar in Luxor. That's the booth setup you see in some of those interviews. And he gave us those bottles on that day. We went behind the bar and got plastic cups for everybody. There's a lot of journalists there. And we poured shots for our friends, but literally 2/3 of one of those bottles was gone that night.
I like it. Drew, wrap it up because
fantastic stuff.
Drew, wrap it up because I already let Brett in on a secret location. I'm gonna let EJ know about it. So just wrap it up so I can tell him off camera.
All right,
guys.
All right,
guys. You got Chris. This is where we make the Patreon joke. Like, if you want to hear about this, you got to subscribe to the Patreon. We're never doing a Patreon. That's fucking dumb. Guys, go support EJ and the guys over at Bootleg Football. I love this shit. I love getting to do this every year. I love getting to drink beer and talk about football with people who are much smarter than me. But for tonight, we got to get the hell out of here. I'm Drew Gear. That's Chris Kruger. That's EJ Snyder. And this has been your Rockpile Report.